Okay, this is our question here. In rural areas of Zambia, particularly in the Copperbelt province, agricultural workers often faced limited job options, and there is a single employer who dominates the labor market for certain crops. This has led to concerns over monopsony in the labor market and its impacts on wages for rural agricultural workers. Explain the concept of monopsony in the labor market and its relevance rural agriculture to rural agricultural labor markets in Zambia. Okay, so first things first, we need to define what this monopsony is and its characteristics. Okay, so a monopsony, okay, there's only one employer, single employer in the market. Okay, there is only one employer in the market. So usually in rural areas, there's a big farm. Find that big farm is the one that's employing most people in that rural area. Okay, so that's the first characteristic of an option. One single employer. Okay, or maybe there might be maybe two, but most of the times it's one. The second characteristic is these guys are they set the wages, they are wage makers. Okay, so they're going to pay the workers according to what they feel like paying the workers, basically. Okay, so like the other labor markets where the wage rate is common amongst that industry and a lot of people are getting paid, and the employers can't set the wages. The other markets like a perfect competition. There the employers can't set the wage rate. But in a monopson, he the employer sets the wage rate. Colleagues, what do you think is a major disadvantage when the employer has the power to set the wage rate? We'll start with you, Madam Juliet. If there's one employer and they have the power to set wages, what do you think is a disadvantage? Yes, even conditions, working conditions, they might be they're at the mercy of the employer. And the employer, since they are the ones who set the wage rate, they're not going to set the best wage rate for the workers. They want the labor to be as cheap as possible so that they can maximize profits. So that's a major danger. Okay. Okay. Another characteristic there's restricted employment. All right. This employer cannot hire everybody. Okay. They cannot hire everybody. They'll hire as many people as they need. So you find an area that needs employment, maybe there are 2 million people there. This monopsony comes, you find they just employ maybe 500 people from there. They won't need all that 2 million, right? They'll just hire according to what they need. Yes, lower wages, when wages tend to be lower than in the competitive labor markets due to lack of competition. The employer is not doesn't have the competing another competing employer in the area. They are alone, right? So as I said stated earlier, wages are going to be low. Okay, you never expect wages to be high. Okay, yes. Market power, the employer's decisions directly influence the labor market's wage and employment levels. As we said, the employer is going to choose how many people they want. Okay, and they'll choose what to pay them basically. All right. Yes, those are some of the characteristics. All right. So to answer this question, I'll send you the documents with these this document with these notes. Okay. Those are just some of the characteristics, right? But the answer for the question is here. Okay. So a monopsony occurs in a labor market where there is a single dominant employer or very few employers who have significant control over hiring the labor, which we said was amongst the characteristics. Okay. Unlike the competitive labor market where there are many employers, okay, the monopolist faces the entire market supply of labor, meaning all the people in that area want to work there. Okay. Yes. And thus wields power to set wages below what would prevail under competition. Okay. If there are many employers in that area, right, then you find it's no longer a monopsony, it's now a competitive labor market. And in the competitive labor market, since there are a lot of employers there, you find now the wage rates, they won't be the ones who be able to set it. Okay. Yes. So this market power allows the monopolist to suppress wages since workers have limited alternative employment options. This is another advantage. Workers cannot go and work anywhere else. They are just faced with that employee. They're at the mercy of them. Okay. So in rural areas of Zambia, especially in the copper belt, the agricultural labor market often exhibits monopsonistic characteristics because one large employer may dominate the production of certain crops. The limited availability of the employers or industries means workers have little choice but to accept the lower wages offered by this employer. This creates the wage setting power for the employer, often result in suppressed wages and reduced employment levels compared to the competitive market. So compared to the competitive market in a monopsony, people are getting paid lower and few people also getting higher compared to a competitive market. All right. So consequently, rural agricultural workers may face limited job opportunities and low bargaining power, exacerbating income inequality and poverty in these regions. Yes, with these low wages and these few employed people, people still, since you're getting paid low, you still be living, unfortunately, in poverty, still suffering, okay? Because the employer doesn't care about you basically. They want to just make their money. So they'll pay you the low rate and they'll make their profits. Okay. And you as the worker, you have got no choice. You just have to accept it. Otherwise, you'll be unemployed. Okay. And also a monopsony doesn't do the area a great benefit because as we said, they only hire the amount of people they need to hire. So if there are 2 million people unemployed and they just hire 500, unemployment levels will still be high in that area. Yes. Any questions? Before we move to part B. So in this question, the people in that rural area, they're going to be in that copper belt region, they're going to be at the mercy of this employer. And this employer is going to pay them less wages and will hire just as many people as they need. So inequality, bad working conditions, and poverty is still going to increase, is still going to remain prevalent in those areas. Right? Mhm. So, any questions before we move to the next part? It's monopoly is for goods. Monopson is for labor, but they're in the same, yeah, but that's in the same arena. They're in the same arena. Yeah, this time it's people. Yes, it's people. Yeah. Because remember, monopoly, they had price making power. Monopsony, wage making power. Uh, what else? Yeah, monopoly is one seller. Here it's one employer. Yeah. So if you remember a monopoly, yes, then you can also remember the what do you call this characteristics also of a monopoly. Okay, so this is the graph. Okay. Now, as I said, this graph is illustrating two important things. So even though you get confused with it, what you must just remember, there are two main things this graph is trying to communicate. Number one is that the monopsony pays workers less than what the competitive market would pay them. That's point number one. The monopsony pays workers less than what the competitive market would pay the workers. Yes, Madam Julian? No, I haven't. I've removed the screen. I'm here now. I'll go back to it. Yes, I'm just telling you the two main points you must get from this graph that I'm about to draw. Okay. Yes. The number one point, as I said, the monopsony is going to pay workers less than the competitive labor market. Okay. In the competitive labor market, there are a lot of employers, and those they do not set the wage rate. Okay. So in a competitive market, it's like workers get a fair pay. Now here in a monopsony, workers are getting paid less, they're getting underpaid. Then the second point that this graph is illustrating is that a monopsony is going to hire fewer workers as compared to the competitive labor market. Have we got those 2 points, colleagues? Because once you've got those 2 points, the graph even will make more sense. Okay. Have we got the 2 points? Should I repeat them again? Where did I think I even wrote them down here? Let me just write it here. Monopsony pays workers less than competitive market. Okay. Number two, monopsony hires less workers than the competitive market. Okay. So when they're asking you draw this graph to illustrate, as this question is saying, draw this graph to illustrate how a monopsony determines wages and employment compared to a perfectly competitive market. Okay. Remember, after you draw this graph, this is what you're addressing to that question. Okay. So let me draw the graph. On our y-axis, we have the wage rate. On our x-axis, we have the quantity of workers. All right. Yes. Remember our labor demand curve, it's downward sloping. Why is the labor demand curve downward sloping? Why is the labor curve, the labor demand curve downward sloping? And we have the labor supply curve, LS. Yes, Madam Juliet, why is the labor demand curve downward sloping? Mr. Davis, why is the labor demand curve downward sloping? Remember, labor who demands labor? Companies. So when the wages are high, company is expected to pay high wages. Is it going to employ a lot of workers? Mm. And when the wage rate is low, okay, low, the company is going to hire more workers because it's cheap. Okay. Yes. Then we have the labor supply curve, which is upward sloping. Who supplies labor? Workers. So at high wage rates, we're going to what more people want to work, right? Then at low wage rates, less people are going to work. Now there's a third graph that is put here, which is the marginal cost graph. Okay, upward sloping like this. This is the marginal cost graph. Colleagues, do we remember what marginal cost is? Do we remember what the marginal cost is? Marginal cost, this is the additional cost you incur when you hire a worker. So now the reason why this curve is above the labor supply curve is because if you want to increase the salary of one worker, okay, you want to hire more workers. So in order to attract more workers, you increase the salary of the workers. It means you're not increasing the salary of that new worker you're hiring. You're also increasing the salary of the other workers that you have within your factory or in your farm. That's why this marginal cost is like this. Okay, because if we increase the salary of one worker, it means the salary of the other workers is going to have to increase. So that's why the marginal cost curve is stopping like this. Okay. So the monopsony is going to higher at this point here. Oh, first wait. Here, where labor supply equals labor demand. Think of this as the competitive market. You've got the wage rate here, and the quantity of workers hired, basically. Okay. This is where labor supply and labor demand equal. That's the wage rate for the competitive market. Now, for a monopson, then they're going to hire where marginal cost here, this point here, where marginal cost equals demand basically, or marginal revenue product. Marginal revenue product is just the additional revenue that you get when you make another product. So in another video, I'll show you how the labor demand equals marginal revenue product. Okay. So the monopolist, the monopsonist is going to hire where marginal cost equals marginal revenue product, which is the same as labor demand. So when you reach this point, you bring your line down, 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 and then where it touches the labor supply curve, you take it to the y-axis. This is the wage rate for a monopson, WM, wage rate for a monopson. We can see that it's less than the wage rate for a competitive market. This is the wage rate of a competitive market, and this is the wage rate of a monopson, way lower than the wage rate of the competitive market. Then when you bring your line down here, so put here as QM, and we can see also the number of employees hired, QM, is less than the number of employees hired in a perfect competition. I'll put this as QPC. Okay, this QPC, quantity of the number of workers hired in the competitive market. Then here QM, the quantity of workers hired in the monopson. Yes. Any questions? So those are the two things it's illustrating. Okay, wage rate is lower, and the number of workers hired is less. Okay, that's what this graph is trying to tell us. Okay, you can see here, the marginal cost of labor lies above the supply curve because hiring additional workers requires raising wages not only for a few workers but also for existing workers. Okay, so you increase the wage rate, you hire a new worker and is getting paid higher. Also, it means the other workers, also them, they'll get paid high. If you try to hire another worker and you want to increase the wage, it means even the existing workers, their wages are also going to increase. So the more workers you keep on hiring, the additional cost is going to be increasing because you're not only accounting for that one worker, you're also accounting for the other workers that are there. These notes, these are your, when I send you this document, these are the points you need to remember. Yes. Any questions before we go to the next question? Discuss the role of trade unions in addressing wage disparities in African labor markets with focus on Zambia. Colleagues, I believe we all know what a trade union is. What is a trade union? What is a trade union? Hmm. Yes, these are the voice of the workers, basically. Okay, if workers are not being treated well, these are the people who uprise for the workers. They speak for the workers. If they're not being treated fairly, they're getting paid low amounts. So if a monopson had to set up in a rural area and there's a trade union there, the trade union can also rise up against the monopson. The only downside about it is if this single employer decides to go, you find it will be a bad thing. You've chased away the only employer there. Okay? So it's a, how can I say, it's a tug of war game. Okay. Yes. So trade unions represent workers collectively to negotiate better wages and better working conditions. Okay. In Zambia and across Africa, workers often face low wages and poor job security, especially in sectors like agriculture and mining, which is very true. Okay. A lot of these companies come from abroad. Okay. The top positions they give to their nationals, and the low positions they give the Zambians there. And now in those low positions, those people are getting paid low amounts, and they're not being treated fairly. Even in the construction industry, all right. When a contractor comes in, you find when they hire the, what do you call those, the workers at the lowest position there, you find they won't give them safety helmets, safety boots. Okay. They'll just say, no, you can work as the way you are, just work, we'll pay you. So even when that person gets injured or something, you find even they neglect the person, they just hire a new person. Okay. So working conditions across Zambia and Africa, um, it's bad. Okay. That's why a lot of multinational companies come and take advantage of this. All right. Okay. Unions engage in collective bargaining with employers and governments to push for fair wages and benefits. They advocate for minimum wage laws and fair pay scales to reduce wage disparities. Okay. And it's very important because, as I said, in these rural areas, you find there's no trade union to talk for them. Okay. There is no trade union to talk for them. So they're, they're going to suffer low wages, bad working conditions. Okay? But if there was somebody to, there was a trade union, like in our example for this question here, the trade union can negotiate with the monopson, okay, pay these workers better. Or or if that's not the case, okay, at least give them, they make their working conditions better. But usually the key is about paying better wages because nothing motivates a person more than money when it comes to work. Okay? Unless maybe you love your job, yes, you love your job so much, then it's not only money that's driving you. Okay? But it usually all comes down to the money. They provide legal support to workers facing discrimination or unfair treatment related to wages. Okay. Now, these trade unions can exist, but they also have challenges. Okay, political interference. All right, you find the politicians maybe they are in They are working with those big companies. The trade unions come in, they complain, you find it goes nowhere. Or the politicians don't even take, they don't even care at all, they forget about that. All right. Then another, limited union membership. Okay, some people may not be aware of these trade unions, what they do. Okay, or maybe the number of trade unions that are even out there might be less, so people can, not everyone is joining them. Weak labor law enforcement. Right, government sees workers are being treated badly, but they're not doing anything about it. There are laws out there, but still no one's doing anything about it. Or sometimes there might not even be any laws to protect workers. Okay. But if the laws are there, they're not that strong or they're not that clear or that concise. So that can be a problem. Yeah. So basically, trade unions just help improve labor standards and give workers a stronger voice in wage discussions.